525,600 minutes, 525,000 moments, oh dear. 525,600 minutes. How do you measure a year? In daylights, in sunsets, in midnights, in cups of coffee, in inches, in miles, and laughter and strife. In 525,600 minutes, how do you measure a year in the life of love?
That's how many moments you will live this year. 500,000. It's a lot of time. The song is about how do we measure the year of a person? How do we measure a year in their life? By the cups of coffee, by the sunrises we've seen, by the love that we've shared, by the opportunities we've had to share life together. 525,600 minutes. Where does your faith sit in there? A long time ago, more than 500,000 minutes, when I was in Sunday school, I was taught the scriptures that we have today. How many had to learn the 10 Commandments? And we were taught that they were rules for living, right? And woe be to those who broke them. Do you know that they were never about you? Did you know that? They weren't about you. The laws were handed down. God spoke to Moses from the mountaintop and said, I want my people to learn these rules of living. Except they weren't rules and they weren't laws. They were principles of life. And what they really are is principles of respect. Because it's not about you. It's about it's about your neighbor. It's about what respect you have for your neighbor. It's about what respect you have for people other than yourself. It's about what respect you have for parental figures in your life. You can go down the list and you can look at them and start thinking about them the way they were meant to be looked at. Because they came from a very harsh society and culture where, you know, if it was Canada, the aged and the infirm were put on an ice floe, so to speak. Instead of, I'll turn my music off. That'll help you, right?
That was an effect for trying to...
No, I know. And if you look to the Israeli culture, a harsh culture, the old Hebrew culture of survival, people who got to the age of many of us here, they weren't respected for their age and their wisdom. They were a burden on the family and they were put out. It was a violent society. If my neighbor had something I wanted, I didn't have to respect my neighbor, I took it. So principles of living were brought into being. God wants us to understand community. And principles of living are brought into being. We created them we call them the 10 Commandments. Those 10 Commandments, by the way, were processed and regurgitated and manipulated and analyzed by all the religious authorities of the day and by all the authorities of the time, and they were turned into laws, a system of laws. You've heard it all, the Torah, the Talmud, the Codex of the Hebrew faith. They became approximately 658 laws that if you actually tried to keep every one of them, it's impossible. Round about 300, you're breaking one of the first ones. You can't do them all. You can't possibly. But they tried. Impossible ways of being to maintain a sense of self in life. Rules that soon had no spirit. People could be morally just by keeping the law and never understanding the spirit of it. And then you come to that story in the New Testament. Jesus in the temple, getting angry. And, we Christians, we love that story because it's all about Jesus predicting the temple. It's always about predicting his resurrection. It's always about, the impossibly perfect faith of Jesus who's going to climb on the cross, die, and live, and we're going to worship him. Without ever looking at what he was actually saying the day he walked in there and saw all that. Of course, we also have used it against moneylenders and doing business on Sunday and all those other, ills in society that we've gone after, right? Basically, what Jesus went to was the glorified yard sale of the temple. Now, we don't get mad at churches for having yard sales. We're going to hold a yard sale, right?
It's going to be up here in the church, too?
It's going to be up here in the church. And there'd be those that say that's just plain sinful. Without realizing, how many people are aware of how the temple structure was built in Israel? Do you know how the temple worked? Like, the Hebrew faith claims it was open to all people, so they had places in the temple that were appropriate for everyone to come into. The Holy of Holies. Let's call this the Holy of Holies. It was shrouded, and this is where the ark was. And only the high priest could enter the Holy of Holies. And quite frankly, a lot of our church architecture today still emulates the temple. And then the general priest population could come into this area. Then there was the area for the Jews, for the Hebrews, and it was divided into the male and the female section, and they could all access that. Okay? And then there was the court of the Gentiles. And that said that anybody could come to the temple. Any Gentile, any non-Jew could come, could approach God from that distance, and they could have that area back there. Now, proper temple practices was that you were to come to the temple, you were to make an offering. This is where the temple made its money. This was the collection system of the temple. This was like we have offering plates, or we have yard sales and all the rest of it. They had the offering system. And depending on your means, you could offer a dove, or a goat, or a cow, and you would come and you would buy the animal with the temple coin, and it would be slaughtered and offered up as burnt offering to God. Obviously, the bigger the animal, the more meaningful your offering was, the bigger the cost attached to it. But they had to have a place to keep all this livestock, because you couldn't just bring any animal off the street. It had to be clean to be offered to God. So it had to be a pure animal raised within the temple system. You're starting to see how the economy worked? We will raise the animals, you will buy them from us, you will pay us to sacrifice them, and you will get your homage to God. So, lacking space, the animals were kind of kept, and all the trade was done in the court of the Gentiles. It wasn't done out where the Hebrew people had their place of gathering, or the priests and the... So Jesus walked in and said, "My God is for all people." This is about right relationships again. This is about community. Why are you segregating these people off over here and having all the trade go on in their place of worship? He wasn't objecting to the trade, he was objecting to where it was being done. One of the iconic statements of the 20th century was written in a little book called Animal Farm by George Orwell that said, "All animals are equal, but some are more equal than others." Remember that? You might have had to learn that in school. It's, it was a takeoff on social systems and the communist versus capitalistic system. But basically the principle is that all people are made equal, but some are considered more equal than others. And that's what was going on here in the temple. All people could come to God. All people were God's own children in some way, some misguided way they didn't recognize. but some were more equal than others. And the equality was showed by how close you could get to God. And Jesus is trying to say, no! There's not a hierarchy here. This is not structured this way. God didn't do this. God called forth worship. God called forth community. God calls us forth to live and share life as equals, without some being more equal than others. But what we do is we keep institutionalizing the faith. And we keep creating hierarchies out of it. So you have Moses having a conversation with God, and God saying, "I will be with you and with your people always." And here's what you need to do to be aware of that, to keep that in front of you. And it's to respect, and to honor, and to care for. And he gives out these commandments saying, live by this pathway, live by these principles. And we took the principles and we made them laws. And we took the laws and we codified more laws from them. And thousands of years later, along comes the one we call God's Son and says, look, you got the message wrong. That's not what Dad was saying to you. Do you think we might want to try it again? In the course of a year, how do you live your life? Do you live it with a sense of respect, with a sense of honor? Do you witness to God in the places where you are? Or do you need that special room to do it in? And do you need to clutter up somebody else's room so you can do it in your room more purely than in others? Is it not about where we gather? And he says, I will tear this all down and I will rebuild this. And he may be referring to his body on a cross, or he may be referring to your life and faith. He may be referring to the entire human race, or all of creation, to say there is a way to live in harmony and in balance one with the other. Have you ever met people who are very, very, very spiritual? I don't want to use the word religious because that connotates that they may be like a presbyter or a conference president or something, and that's not the same thing. They even be clergy. That scares me. Have you ever met people who are deeply spiritual? Anybody? Somebody in your life that you could you identify them as somebody who has an inner sense of balance? That they get it? They hold the tension between what I have to do, what needs to be done, how to care for people? That they're not about themselves or about the other. They're not inappropriately codependent, that they have no sense of their own self to help other people, but they have a healthy sense of who they are, healthy sense of where they fit in God's world, and a healthy sense of how they can serve and love others. And you respect them for that. Isn't that true? Those are the people we are attracted to. That's what Christ is talking about. That's what God's saying to Moses. Find the balance. Seek the harmony. Understand that in the 500,000 moments of a day or a year, that when you break bread with anyone, I don't care if it's a stranger at the restaurant table next to you, live with a sense of respect. Even our creed calls us to that, to live with respect in creation, to understand the interconnectedness of us all, that our life is a part of God's sacred creation. And so how I treat someone else has an impact. How I look at someone else has an impact. How I speak with someone else has an impact. And even when I'm not conscious of it, it has an impact. And let's not walk around with the sense that all people are equal, but most are less equal than me. Because that's what we really do with it, right? I have a t-shirt actually that says, Jesus loves you. And underneath in fine letters it says, "But I'm his favorite." I don't wear it here very often. But it's funny. It's truly funny if it wasn't so sad that that's the way most people live their lives. With the sense that I don't have to worry about the rest of the world. I'll keep the rules. And the rules say if I do it this way, it doesn't matter what the consequences are for them. And I've seen a lot of people keep the rules and have very little faith. I wish when I was 10 years old, sitting in the Sunday school, and my Sunday school teacher was ramming those 10 Commandments down my throat, she would have understood that I had a learning disability, that I can't memorize things. Because I spent the first 10 years of my life after that feeling guilty that I couldn't memorize the 10 Commandments. You know, for those of you that love the way that I mess up the Lord's Prayer, it's because if it wasn't printed up here and taped to the pulpit on this thing, I'd never know it. I can't memorize. But I was taught that I was less equal than others because I couldn't. Think of the consequences of what you say and do and how you live your life. And remember that when you enter someone's presence, ask yourself, are you doing business in their place of worship? Are you upsetting their sense of their own spiritual involvement with God because of the way you interact with them? That's all Jesus was trying to say when he walked into the temple that day. Think about people. Look around you. Okay.